Just because we know how to talk doesn't mean we know how to communicate well. Understanding the ins and outs, the detail, the science of good communication is fundamental, personally and for business. So let's go into that.
Hi, welcome to Revolving Change. I'm one of your hosts, Joanna. I'm a junior coach here. And with me today is our founder and resident dinosaur, Jorge Lobo. Say
I like
hi.
Resident Dinosaur. That's an upgrade. I like that.
Yes, our resident dinosaur. So, today, what we have on our podcast is we're going to talk about communication, more specifically, the different forms of communications our members have been asking us further questions about this because there are different forms of communication, right? It's not just a one on one, there's the one to many, many to one, many to many, which is very, very rare, but all very much occur within the workplace. And our members are wondering, how do we go about that? How do we become effective?
Well, let's go through all of them. I mean, you just said many to many is not so so common, but allow me to disagree because whole social media is many to many. When you go into Facebook or you go into LinkedIn, you have many people communicating with many people, and that is a new way of communication which did not exist in my dinosaur days, because it was unstructured and it was difficult. But now it has gained a lot of power. But we're going to get to many eventually. So
Mhm.
maybe we should start with the basic
One on
of
one.
one-to-one communication,
Yeah.
which is what we traditionally think is easy and simple, and by definition it should be, but it ain't. It's very difficult and it has a lot of in and outs. And that's where often communication in general will start and unfortunately also end. Because if one-on-one ain't working properly, then the rest of communication chances are will not work either, because it means we're not mastering the basics of good communication. One on one, as I said, may seem simple, but it ain't often that simple because personalities, as two people communicate, play a bigger role and will determine how communication will work and will determine the outcome. There's a number of things to be taken into account in terms of also the skills that we need for good one on one communication, whether it is empathy, whether it is listening skills, massive issue. As in brackets, how many hours do we get in school to learn to write? But very few hours to learn to speak properly, and 0 hours on how to listen. Because we have ears, two of them, and know how to listen, we think we are active listeners. Well, we are not. So that is a different training program, and it requires a lot of attention, particularly one on one. The way we relate to our interlocutors. So we are speaking and hearing and responding. And I said hearing, not listening. We're hearing and we are reacting to what we hear, not to what we understand, because we're not active listening. That is one of the major breakdowns in one on one communication. But let's look at one on one communication from two aspects, on a personal note and a corporate note. On a personal note, you may be affecting your relationship with your peers. You may be affecting relationship within your family. I think many of us have examples where I told you so, and the person walks away with what we told them, but we aren't even sure they understood what we wanted. And then we realize, now let me switch over to business. You give somebody an assignment, you tell them what to do. It's one way communication, one on one communication, but it's one way. I'm telling you what to do. And the person comes back later with the wrong assignment, done wrongly at the wrong time or incomplete. And we are saying, you did not understand what I said. Well, we didn't check for understanding. We did not verify that the person understood what we wanted. Maybe we gave incomplete instructions. Maybe we didn't give a proper deadline. Maybe the tools needed for the job were not there. So there's so many aspects that will impact the outcome in business on a one-on-one communication. That is dramatic. When you have people working in a lab and you don't have proper two-way communication on a one-on-one, you may have a scientist working on the wrong thing. And I know because one of my daughters is a scientist and I know examples of poor communication. Or let's go to business take one of my favorite examples, which is Young Carlson, Moments of Truth at a Time in SIS. It's a long time, but it's a fantastic book forever because it's empowering people. If these people which are empowered in moments of truth with their customers, if they don't know how to communicate properly one-on-one, that communication is going to go wrong. And the moment of truth will be a sad, bad, negative moment of truth and not a constructive, positive moment of truth, which will help business. So one-on-one is absolutely critical. We're going to go into
What
more
are the
detail. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
what are the common pitfalls when it comes to one-on-one communications?
In addition to
Like
the
you
lack
did
of
mention
skills,
earlier.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mentioned the
You
skills,
did
but then
mention
you have,
earlier
go ahead.
not not listening at all.
Yes,
You think the other person comprehended but didn't. And another one is that it's not a two-way communication, it's just a one way.
correct.
And anything else aside from
Yeah,
that?
then you have culture, for instance, you have gender, you have generational issues like me, a dinosaur, with young people like you, even younger, we have in our team, where you have very young people, as you have witnessed when they join our team, they get scared or impressed with experience with a dinosaur and they don't dare speaking up, they don't dare asking questions, they're scared of asking questions because they're, now we talk about perception management, they are afraid of being perceived as not knowing enough and therefore they shouldn't be asking questions.
Mm.
We work on that internally. We have a very strong culture of open communication, but very few companies do. It's one of the examples that when we share with our clients, they take for granted it's happening in their company. When we do our research and we do our diagnostics, it turns out that no, people don't do it. And people are scared often of authority. They're often scared of gender differences. Unfortunately, in some
Mm.
businesses, we know that female executives will either excessively use power or be underpowered by male executives that use their power
Mm.
on them. So you have a
Yeah.
gender battle going on. I'll leave aside now because that's another training program we have on female empowerment. But we know there is a battle going on that impacts communication. And not only one, not one to one, but also one to many to one, and many to many. It has a
Yeah.
great impact. But culture also. In some cultures, it is impolite to ask. So sometimes when you have people of these cultures in your team, it's imperative that you bring these culture issues for discussion, bring them on the table, and have them, I won't say neutralized, but actually neutralize is the right word. So they don't affect the way you communicate in business. But sometimes it can be very difficult.
Okay, no, so that's on a one-on-one setting that's actually quite understandable that these things happen. What about the one is to many? Can you talk more about that?
One to many when it's two way or one way. One to many one way is easy, right? It's a newspaper when it's written, it's a radio, it's TV. That's one to many, right? So you communicate.
Speech, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, public speech. Now, but there people may throw something at you, so you have communication. So say you're speaking up in a podcast, right? So you may have one-on-one communication with the podcast, but you're having at the same time one to many to the audience of the podcast. And if it's the recording afterwards of the podcast, if it was live, then you have one to many second time with people that are watching it afterwards and maybe can leave a comment but cannot interact with you anymore. It's too late. It's a time lapsed interaction. So one to many is very important because you need to understand beforehand who is the audience, who am I talking to, what happens if those that I had intended to talk to include also others that I did not intend to talk to. So let's use a simple example. If it's a technical, scientific talk, communication, and I wound up having non scientific people in my audience, then those people are going to have a big interrogation sign in their faces. They're going to have the automobile look because they will not understand. Now, one to many in business opens a totally different kind of worms because you have one to many in your department. Maybe you're managing 10, 12 people, which would be a good span of control. But then maybe you're also the CEO talking to maybe your direct reports, another 12, 14 people, but maybe to the whole company. So it will depend on whether it is an open or closed communication. So is it that I'm recording something or I'm writing a newsletter? A newsletter is one too many. I need to take into account my audience. I need to take into account the level of understanding of the language I'm using, the vocabulary I'm using, the words I'm using. I need to be aware and sensitive to, we mentioned a moment ago on one-to-one, culture, gender, seniority and authority. All those play a role. A word of the CEO, when the CEO is appreciated and respected in the company, which most are, otherwise they don't stay CEOs and go somewhere else. Those words carry a lot of weight. Now, let's use an example of the CEO and stay on business. If there's one too many for internal purposes, so I'm going to excite my team, I'm going to show them where we're going, I'm going to share my vision so they understand what we're doing today has an impact on where we're going tomorrow. They understand we're not just building walls, we're building a cathedral. You know, all the analogies of being part of a team and a vision and executing and implementing that vision. At the same time, one too many for my customers is going to be a different message because it is a different audience. The vocabulary I'm going to use is going to be more tailored to what my, when we talk perception management now, we're talking about expectations, all the many topics and skills that we know are so important that we train on. Customers have a different set of expectations and their vocabulary will be different focused, different drive than our staff. If I'm going to communicate with my suppliers, I may have again a different focus. When I'm talking to our stakeholders, include shareholders, a complete different also conversation, a different message. So one to many needs a lot of preparation and is a great skill which not many have. I will not claim to have it, to be able to talk to all of them at the same time, because it means you need to dissect your information and you need to give bits and pieces to everybody in the audience while having a foundation of common information that applies to all of them. So it takes a lot of good preparation. We have helped CEOs doing that. And once they're good at it, it's tremendously powerful because when you record that information and share it, you can use it for a long time if the information stays active, but with many people. So that's mainly the I would say the risks and the challenges on one to many.
Yeah, and there's also something that you consistently mentioned during our skills development laboratory or some of our training programs when it comes to communication. The rate at which you speak has to be at the rate of consumption,
Yes,
right?
delivery at the rate of consumption. I mean, you have repeatedly highlighted that I speak sometimes too fast, that I get excited with my conversation and my content, and I just increase my rate of delivery, which can be very negative because I'm losing my audience, I'm losing my listeners' comprehension. They may think they're comprehending, but I'm overwhelming them with information and the speed by which I'm delivering. So delivering at the speed of consumption, like I'm trying to do now by pacing what I'm saying, because I normally naturally speak fast because I have a fast brain, or that's one of my defects, one of my challenges, that I speak very, very fast. And then I get entangled in my own words. And then sometimes I lose where I was going and need to go back, or I go down the rabbit hole, like you have often highlighted, like we're going in circles. Yeah, because I keep adding another layer, another layer, another layer. Yeah,
Yeah.
speed of consumption is extremely important.
Hmm.
And again, now we're
Yeah.
talking, let's use the examples. Culture plays a role. And culture, I mean,
Language.
exactly, thank you. That was the one I was looking for. Language is extremely important because, I mean, you and I are not native, well, you are a more native English speaker, although it's not your mother tongue, but you are more proficient in English than I am. And it's not my native language, and I'm using it most than my native language is. So understanding the language capability of your audience, but also your proficiency in delivering in a language other than your mother tongue. All those are elements that play a role in delivering at the speed of consumption.
Yeah, and so just to add on that, like when you talked about one-to-one communication, a two-way communication is actually important on a one-on-one. But when it comes to one to many, opportunities for two-way communication is low, if I may say so. It's not impossible,
Limited.
but it's low. Yeah, it's limited. Correct. That's the word. That's the more appropriate word to use. So how do you then facilitate? Is there a
Well, that's
need
a
to get
choice you make.
understanding?
That's a choice you make when you're communicating. Will you allow for two-way or you not will allow for two-way? Yeah, it is. It is depends on the setup and depends on your intention. It's a question of intentionality. If I want to have feedback in a one-to-many, but the many are 5,000, it becomes impossible, right? By the time you have a TED talk, sometimes you have a TED conference, and you have maybe 60, 80, 100 people, and there is a mic that goes around. So you can talk to many and have some of the many come back with questions. And this person that is asking the question in this setting is communicating also one to many because he's asking me the question or the speaker the question, but is sharing the question with the whole audience and you're responding for the whole audience. So is a one to many, repeatedly one to many exchange while limited to the speaker and to the people that get the microphone. That is very interesting because that you set it up properly. I know that you select who are going to ask the questions because you don't know, but it doesn't matter. You can limit and say, or you see it in press conferences, right? You look at politicians. Maybe not always a good example, but let's take a press conference of maybe the general assembly of a business. They will let shareholders ask questions. You have maybe 5,000 people, and some people will get onto the queue with a microphone and ask questions to the board of directors, and that is one. That is one. This case is many to many because you have a whole board, but you have one speaker in the board sharing with the shareholder assembly. You may have a selection of people of that assembly that volunteer and ask questions to the board, but that benefits everybody because it's public and it's on the speakers, right? So, but it's a question of setup. It's limited, but it's a question of setup and of intentionality. You need to decide and design it for it to work that way.
Okay. Shall we then move on to? So that's one is to many is a little bit challenging already. What about many is to many?
Many to many is modern, right? It's social media. I mean, in the old days, many to many was people shouting at each other, right? So it was not very effective. But today, when you have people in our membership is many to many because when you have a member raising a point, talking to the membership, and different members respond and comment along with us and our coaches, then it's many to many. Everybody is talking to everybody, and that is a great benefit of social media and the new technology that allows us to communicate many to many. LinkedIn is a good example. When we post something on LinkedIn and you have several people reacting, so acting, commenting, and adding to it. So many to many I'm saying new phenomenon for dinosaurs like me. It's for younger generations, millennials and Gen Zs and Gen Xs, is part of their bread and butter, how they grew up with. So in social media, when you have this many to many, you need good moderators. They're going to ensure communication stays within the certain frame, that it gets out of control, that when people say things they shouldn't, it can be shut off, or when they're too
Mhm.
aggressive or rude and polite. So moderator is very important. It's a new role. Moderators, in that sense, did not exist at the time. So that's many
Okay.
to many. It's a great opportunity,
Right.
but different.
Yeah. I think the many to many is fairly difficult to manage depending on the size of the audience or the people within that.
You're managing well. You're in charge of revolving chains, and it's going well.
That's why it's coming from experience that it's very hard depending on how many is the many to many. So we've discussed about the different forms of communication. We have the one-on-one, one is to many, many is to many. How then do we, and we've discussed the challenges within each. How then do we effectively communicate? What are the solutions that we could put in place in order to avoid these challenges?
Well, this can be common or similar depending if it's personal level or a corporate level, but most of the time, I would say the interaction at corporate level is a more challenging one. But anyway, they all have common components. So understanding listening skills, we mentioned that earlier, is absolutely fundamental. And not understanding, but knowing how to use. active listening skills. And you know, when people say, I hear you, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm listening to you and I'm understanding you. I hear you. I hear the river. It doesn't mean I understand the river. I hear it, but I don't understand. So listening, active listening skills, fundamental. Feedback is extremely important because as we interact, and this applies to all levels and applies one to many, many to one, there's always feedback. When you have an audience, to use a simple example, when you have an audience, you're talking one to many, and you said something, and you have in the audience a certain level of noise that goes up without necessarily being words, you know you're creating a reaction, maybe positive, maybe negative, right? Maybe they're going like, yeah, great, or this is bad news. I mean, really? So being aware beforehand and developing, and now we get to another skill to feedback, which is expectations, creating and setting out the expectations of what people are expected to do and not to do. You're not expected, for instance, in my speak, to ask me questions during the speech. I set the expectation, we set the rules, and this is the way we're going to communicate. And then at the end, you can ask questions. Or other people like, and depending on the type of meeting you have, the type of talk or exchange, maybe it's internal, it's departmental, and you want it to be, when you have a question, raise your question. You know, we want it to be interactive. So listening skills, feedback, expectations. And with expectations means setting the ground rules for communication for that particular situation. And it doesn't mean they're always the same. I can have one to many, but depending on who these many are, remember we talked about audiences, we talked about sizes. It can be many being a dozen or many being 500. The rules are going to be different. And these rules must be set up front and must be communicated. So if we have that training, and okay, you could say now you have 5,000 people, you're going to train everybody on feedback on those 5,000 people. No, of course not. Although we have clients where we have trained their trainers and their trainers train their people on feedback. But that's another aspect of what Revolving Change does and how we manage to implement lasting measurable change. I digress. The key here is to define the conditions and the rules for the communication exchange. I will get feedback from my audience, like for instance, maybe this noise level that goes up, or people going like, showing nonverbal of dissatisfaction or of excitement. I need to decide beforehand, will I respond to that or will I not respond to that? So as the owner of the speaking responsibility, I need to decide up front, either is noise, I will ignore it, or will I interrupt my speech and make it interactive with my audience? Very dangerous thing to do, I will say. But these are things that need to be defined up front. So I know I'm being very generic because each situation will require more emphasis on one skill or the other. It will depend when you have culture, when you have gender issues, when you have generational issues. You're talking, when there's a dinosaur talking to Gen Zs, I need to use a language a Gen Z will understand. If I speak like a dinosaur to dinosaurs, a Gen Z will not get it because a Gen Z doesn't have that experience. Not because a Gen Z cannot understand it. It's not because a Gen Z may be less intelligent. It has nothing to do with it. It's got to do with the vocabulary we used, the technology we used at the time is something they never experienced, they've never seen, they've never been part of. Therefore, I need to adapt also my vocabulary to my audience. So we talked about earlier, you rightly mentioned the speed of consumption, which is extremely important. I'm glad you raised it because it got slipped. Also, the vocabulary is extremely important, that I use words and analogies and examples that relate to my audience. Culturally, if I'm in a country with a particular religion, there might be examples which could be offensive for that audience of mine. And I don't want to get into the examples. There are many examples, but we have to be sensitive to our audience. So the vocabulary, the speed of consumption, the speed of delivery, the vocabulary we use, being gender also, sometimes examples may be offensive to one gender or the other. Or today I should say to any gender. we have to be sensitive to that. So to choose examples, even if we don't mean it to be offensive, and now we're talking about communication, right? And feedback, it doesn't matter if I didn't mean it to be offensive. If somebody perceives it and feels it as offensive, it is perception management. If somebody is offended, then for that person, that message was the wrong message. So it takes a lot of preparation, it takes a lot of expertise, and it takes experience. And sometimes it takes hiring coaches like Revolving Change coaches to help them do that.
So there really is, from what you're saying, there's a lot of preparation that goes into good communication, right? Like for effective communication to happen, you need to consider your audience, learn their language, practice ahead of time. If you don't speak the same language, practice ahead of time how to speak the other person's, the
Well,
receiver's language in order to communicate.
bring somebody into your
No,
preparation that speaks the language, for instance, right? That will help you.
that's true. Actually,
If
that
you don't
also
speak the
helps,
language, you need somebody that will help you. I've done that many
right?
times. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but for everyone that's listening here today, we're not implying that every single time your preparation can be as drastic as needing to bring someone in every time. It's more of like, because it's still not a skill that you're strong at, while you're developing the skills, the preparation time would be more than usual. And then as you become more proficient with communication, then it becomes more natural to you. And the things that you need to consider beforehand are checklists that are automatically in your mind already. Then the preparation time becomes less and less and less. So what we're trying to say here is, while you're learning, while you're developing your communication skills, there's preparation plays a huge role in becoming an effective communicator, and also engaging in effective communication, because it's not just about you talking, but also about you receiving the appropriate feedback in a two-way communication. In the instance of a one-on-one setting, which is more common for managers and leaders to be experiencing, and oftentimes, sometimes during one is too many situations. So I did mention a checklist, and it was a handful. So for all of you who's listening right now, we're actually going to provide the checklist for you, downloadable by clicking on this link below. Because again, we're here to journey with you in creating real results in your business and career.
Moment of caution, if I
Yes?
may.
Yeah.
Preparation will become less, but there's always a risk, and I have fallen into that trap, that because we feel we're more proficient, we have learned more, we can cut corners, get
Mm,
quicker, do
yeah.
it faster, and that is a risk. And when you're dealing with,
Complacency.
well, complacency, or just you feel strong, but you're underestimating the risks on the other side of the communication.
Mm,
So I remember, for instance, when I worked in China many, many years ago, at the very beginning of Deng Xiaoping's opening to the West, I was running a project in China, which was a fascinating experience. And communication was so massively difficult because I had, fortunately, a staff which was Chinese but had studied in Canada. And he is the one that helped me communicate with the local Chinese top management. They didn't speak a word of English. And then we had a CEO which was European. So just languages, what language comprehension was so important in terms of what you say, you may not say. Of course, when I'm in a meeting now, we're in the US or we are in Europe, we're in Brazil, the preparation is not as drastic, but still, using those checklists is extremely important. Even if we feel comfortable, I have this, sometimes there's a little one that we say, oh, I hadn't thought of that one. So yeah, those checklists are going to be, I think, very, very instrumental. Also for seniors like me.
yeah. 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 I get it. Well, thank you for that word of caution, word of advice at the very end there. There you go. What that's what it takes to be one of our resident dinosaurs. Experience. They have plenty of experience. They've made the mistakes that we can avoid.
And they're not the only dinosaur on board. We have more dinosaurs.
We have more dinosaurs on board. Most of our mentors are also dinosaurs who have years and years and years of experience. Anyway, that is actually it for this week's podcast.
Thank you.
If you have any more questions for us, just drop them in the comment section below us or send us a direct message. Until our next podcast, this has been Joanna, and with me is our
And this
founder,
is my
Mr. Jorge
crocodile
Rufo.
eating my name.
Okay.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for listening. Ciao.
Ciao.